I'm just a few short weeks away from becoming a mom for the very first time, and there is a sea of emotions welling up inside of me. In a recent conversation about motherhood, I was asked to recall my earliest memory. Now, people say a lot of unique and sometimes hurtful things to you as they are preparing you for what's to come, but this one really intrigued me. What was my earliest memory? So I went back and I thought through and realized that it was around the time that I was turning 5. We had moved into the house that I would eventually grow up in, and I didn't have any friends. And I just have this really visceral memory of stepping off the curb that was right in front of my home, walking across our cul-de-sac to a group of kids that were already playing together, just hoping that they would accept me, that as I introduced myself to them, that they would introduce themselves back. Again, just hoping that I would find really a feeling of home in this new community. Now, the person who asked me that question then said, I want you to remember 2 things from that exercise. First, you don't have a single memory of your time from birth to age 5. So know that in this journey you're beginning, you have time to learn and grow and settle yourself into becoming a mom. You don't have to get it right away. Spend those first few years just basking in the preciousness, messiness, sleeplessness, and joy of the new life that God has called you to raise. And second, over the coming years, your origin story and the way that you remember it will matter more and more. Take time often to reflect on who you were and how that plays into who you are. There's no greater key to unlocking the door of our hearts than raising our children, and this may be one of God's greatest gifts. I want you to know that as a new mom, you're not alone in this journey, and God has not called you to such an honored role only to leave you alone in it. There's a lot of uncertainty in the last few weeks of pregnancy, and just about 1,000,000 questions run through my mind every second. As I draw close to my due date and the emotions begin to build up inside of me, I find myself leaning into God and His Word more and more. I'm pretty sure no one understands parenting more than God because He created us in His image, yet we've fallen so short of His original glory. His first children, the Israelites, well, they had a tendency to rebel and resist His guidance. But through it all, He loved them, cared for them, and showed them how to live and grow. I'm reminded of a passage in Exodus in which God is telling His people about an important aspect of parenting. It comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. It says, "These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates." In this passage, God is helping the Israelites learn how to be better parents because, after all, they had seen and experienced some pretty rough times. They had been enslaved, beaten, and humiliated, left to think that they were better off as lesser beings than the Egyptians who had held them captive. But God rescued them. He literally parted an ocean so that they could escape. He fed them when they were hungry, and He provided water when they were thirsty. But as they continued to question and fail Him, He understood that it was also important to teach them. Since they spent a lot of time grumbling and complaining, they lost sight of God's love and care for them. So He sent them on a journey for 40 years. And it was this journey that helped them find their way back to Him. Through the ups and downs of their distrust and disobedience, He cared for them, even when it was hard to do and even when they turned their backs on Him. So in this passage, when God is imploring His children to share all that He has done for them with their children, He's essentially giving them a pathway to parenting. He is saying, I have given you the rules to live by. I have shown you how much I love you and that I will never leave you. And I have reminded you that your origin story, your history matters. So share it with your children. Teach them what you have learned so that they can teach their children, and then they can teach their children, and on the story goes. As I reflect back on my own life and think about my son that will be born very soon, I think about the things that God has taught me through the different experiences that I've had. And I'm drawn back to a time in 2017 where I was so anxious and fearful. It started with one day all of a sudden having chest pain, and that launching me into 4 months of anxiety attacks, hospital visits, and sleepless nights where I couldn't control my mind as it wandered and was afraid of making mistakes or letting people down, or really more importantly, letting God down. And as I think about my son's life, man, how badly I want him to not have to experience something like those 4 months. So now me as a mother gets to walk alongside him and say, this is what I've learned about God. This is what God has taught me in seasons like this, where I was prone to believe that it was, how I performed or what I could do that gave myself value. But instead, God was reminding me that he gives me value. He's the one that says who I am, what my identity is, and that it's his love that anchors me. So now, instead of my son having to experience months and months of anxiety or difficult times where he questions his identity, he can look back at my origin story and realize that God has called him to something greater and invites him into this beautiful, adventurous story where he doesn't have to be afraid to fail or afraid of letting God down. Parenting won't always be easy. And as I'm learning, there are often more and more questions than answers. So it's important to recognize when you're feeling anxious, acknowledge when doubt creeps in, and be honest when worry begins to overcome you. Listen to stories of your past and notice how who you were has defined who you're becoming. God is constantly moving you forward, and he will use all that you've gone through to impact your child's life. So take a deep breath, relax, and let him lead. There will be a lot of uncertainty in the weeks leading up to becoming a mom for the first time, and if you're not intentional, fear and worry can overshadow the joy and excitement. But remember that God will never leave you, and that he understands you in ways that you may not even understand yourself. Spend time in his word and uncover his love for you so that you can, in turn, give that love away to your child. Until next time, friends, be blessed.